Rupert Younger, thank you so much for joining us on Minds Worth Meeting.
Very nice to be with you, Justin and Meg. Thank you.
So before we get into all the questions and everything, what is that poster behind you? That's really cool.
So these are matchboxes with birds on them. I'm a very amateur twitcher, so I am learning a lot about birds, and this was a lovely gift from my wife to me in recognition of my passion for birds.
That's very cool. What is a twitcher? I haven't heard that in relation to birds before.
That's a British expression then. Apologies. So a
No, no.
twitcher is someone who spends their leisure hours wandering around trying to find and then identify birds. I
Okay.
don't know why it's called a twitcher. I think probably because they hide in the undergrowth waiting for birds to arrive, and so you get twitching of leaves and stuff like this.
No, okay. Not to be confused with the people who play video games and stream it live on Twitch. Very different area.
Definitely not to be convinced with that.
Okay, so I want to talk about your book, The Reputation Game. So you say that reputation is today's most valuable currency, both personally and in business, all the way up from individual to the company level. What benefits come from having good reputation, and what damage can a bad reputation do?
Right. Well, it's interesting to set the context. First of all, if you go back 50 years to 1974, about 80 plus percent of the value of the S&P 500 was in tangible assets.
Mhm.
So the biggest companies on the exchanges at that time were GE and Xerox and big hardware companies,
Sure.
IBM. Today, that figure is completely reversed. So now over 80%, actually closer to 90% of the S&P's 500's value is accounted for by intangible assets. So the
Okay.
biggest companies are now the asset-light companies. It's the Alphabets, it's the
Hmm.
Googles, etc. So the idea that your brand or that your image or that your perception matters is cemented in the value of companies. So that's I think a useful starting point for this debate
Sure.
because often people think this is just about some generalized perception which has some sort of broad value, but there's some hardcore straight valuation which can be done on the value of perceptions. Um, but then you go beyond into the real stories, and we all know this, which is that our perceptions precede us, our
Yep.
reputations
Hmm.
precede us. So the first thing that anyone, if you're in any way like most of us do, when we're about to meet someone for the first time, we Google them.
Right. Yep.
We go online, we start finding out who they are. So how they are curated online, how they appear in that world, really matters. And if you found that this person is not to your liking, ideologically different from you, they have different interests, your inattention rises. The way that you actually address them changes. You
Hmm.
physically interact with them in different ways. So it moderates your behavior for a start, but also if you discover some things that you particularly don't like in due diligence terms, when you have a look, it may stop you from awarding them the contract or
Sure.
employing them in your company. So your reputations really do have an outsized value, and people often make the mistake of thinking this is a digital phenomenon.
Right.
As I say to my class in Oxford, this is a phenomenon that's existed for thousands and thousands of years. So if you think about the Stone Age nomadic communities, right back, um, your reputation was extraordinarily valuable in a real life and death way. So I
Sure.
meet you, and we are sitting together outside the campfire, and we're thinking about where to get our food for the next 10 days. Your reputation as a great hunter, you turn up at the fire and you say, I know the buffalo are to the left and it's 4 days' walk. Your reputation is literally life and death for me.
Right.
If I believe
Right.
you and if you're credible, I start walking for 4 days in the hope of finding the buffalo. But if you are misleading me and if you're a liar and the buffalo are 4 days to the right, I've got a big problem. I'm out
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
energy and I'm probably dead. So This has a huge historical precedent. It goes right up to Phoenician traders 2,000 years ago, who took on board huge cargoes of grain on trust. So the owners would park their grain with you. These ships would leave, and 6 months later or more, you'd get your money back.
Right.
Your reputation as a trader was enormously important. Um, so this is a phenomenon which is supercharged by the digital age, but it has very, very long tendrils through history.
Okay. That's fascinating because, as you said, a lot of people think of it as a digital phenomenon, but those are great examples of how long we have had to think about that. So if a business finds itself with a bad reputation for whatever reason, what can they do to turn that around? And can they? Is it possible to?
So the yes is the answer. They can, but there's no smoke without fire normally.
Sure.
And
Yep.
so the thing that organizations fail to do well is to resolve underlying issues. Often it's very tempting to try and communicate your way out of a crisis or a problem or a bad reputation. The most important advice that I give working with organizations, but also in the work that we do at Oxford, is to understand that there are some fundamental reasons why the perceptions have emerged in the way they have.
Right.
And you've got to be honest about that. You've got to take a good self-reflective look at why people regard you as either of poor capability or a poor character. And I'll come back to that distinction because those distinctions are just so valuable when it comes to
Yeah.
thinking about organizational reputations. So we'll come back to that. But yeah, companies can address them and their poor reputations, but only if they understand and then address the underlying causes.
Okay. Yeah. And it's fascinating because I feel like it's easier to dig yourself deeper. It's harder to dig yourself out.
Right. And often the digging yourself out is reputationally the most problematic. So if you take a look back at political scandals, take a look at the Watergate scandal.
Right. Right.
The issue of breaking into the Democratic Party offices was bad enough, but it was the lies and the cover-ups which really did for Nixon, for example.
Right.
And I often think and I spend a lot of time trying to explain this to both students and also CEOs, is that there is a very, very big piece of analytical thinking that has to be done about how you respond to problems. If you try and cover up or PR your way out of something, you're only making it worse. You're compounding the problem. And this is perhaps where it'd be nice to come back to this capability character distinction, because it really is one of the most, I think, practical and valuable insights from our work in research terms, but also in practice over the last 15, 20 years. And it goes like this. The story really goes like this, is that there are two lenses through which most of us view others. And those others could be other friends, it could be organizations, it could be nation states, it could be institutions. So very broad others. The first lens that we look at others through is whether they're capable. Are they a good lawyer? Do they make great clothes? Are their cars good? And that's a very important lens. That's this perception of how capable they are. The second lens has got nothing to do whether or not you're good at making cars or clothes or law. The second lens is, what are my perceptions of your organizational or individual character?
Right.
So you've got perceptions of capability and you've got perceptions of character. And these two show up in fundamentally different ways across organizations, and they matter to different people. So take a look at VW, a big global crisis with the defeat devices on the emissions. When you think about that, ask yourself the question, when faced with the information that they were doing that, is your immediate reaction to that this is a capability problem for them, or is this a character problem?
Right.
Now you've got to kind of come to the view that it's a character problem, right? Because they still make great cars. It's just they lie and cheat while they're about it, right?
Right.
And so that's a character issue. And there's a couple of very, very nice, simple takeaways from that. I think it was Warren Buffett who said it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 20 minutes to lose it. Well, not true, right? Capability reputations are very hard to get. You've got to prove time and time again that you're capable of doing something before you're believed at being able to do that thing. But once you've got that capability reputation, you've got to do a hell of a lot to destroy it, right? So take a look at BP, right? And its reputation for being a good geological discovery company. That was built up over hundreds of years, just over 100 years. And nothing that they've done in recent years with the disasters and the problems they've had have undermined their ability, or at least the belief that people have, that they're a good high geology company. But in character terms, character-wise, they're very volatile. Characters, you can be a hero one day and a zero the next, which is why you saw what you saw in BP. And going back to VW, the same thing, right? VW, they were in capability terms. They actually had their best sales year ever the year after their defeat device stuff, including in digital car in diesel cars. So capability, people still wanted to buy the cars because they were great cars. The problem for VW, of course, is that character matters not to people who are buying the cars, but it does matter to counterparties. It mattered to investors, it mattered to regulators, it mattered to employees, it mattered to all of the counterparties of the organization. And they're the ones who withdrew their support at that point. And they've imposed fines, and there's been all sorts of problems. And of course, it's character issues that actually kill the senior people and their jobs, right? So think about VW, Martin Winterkorn had to go. In BP's terms, Tony Hayward had to go. And if you take a look at Boeing more recently,
Right.
the CEO there had to go. So it's a really, really interesting look at reputation. I'm always very keen to talk about the fact that reputation has two dimensions. There's this perception of capability and perception of character. And once you start analyzing that, you can get really quite deep into some valuable insights for you and your organization.
Can some of the bigger organizations damage the reputation of a whole industry? What I'm thinking, I'm coming here from about 20 years in broadcasting. And right now, not a lot of people want to get into it because the reputation is job stability isn't great. And it's not like that throughout the industry. A number of the big ones have those concerns. So can those large companies hurt that reputation for a whole industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think broadcasting is not probably the best place to start, but
Fair.
But equally, if we're going to focus on broadcasting because you've come from it, there's been some pretty contentious practices in the broadcasting industry, and some pretty contentious individuals who are making those decisions in the broadcasting industry. So on the plus side, you've had extraordinary, some extremely visionary people who've created these massive media organizations. I mean, take a look back at Rupert Murdoch when he invested and set up Sky, 10 years worth of losses before they even started to make a profit, and now look at where it is. But equally, the media organizations have had some extraordinarily bad practice, and they can affect. So one of the probably the most, I guess, difficult story for the media has been certainly in the UK context is the phone tapping inquiries.
Right.
So this is the bad behavior by journalists using advanced technology to tap people's phones without their consent. And of course, causing huge personal damage and harm, as well as massive intrusion. And that certainly affected or infected the journalist community and the perception of every single tabloid newspaper. Yes, it absolutely can. The most obvious industry to talk about that contagion that you're talking about is financial services and banking, where you see, very bad behavior by one bank tarring the reputation of a whole range of different banks. And when it comes to bad character, bad practices, what happens is that every other firm has the impact of this through the
Right.
regulatory action. So when
Hmm.
regulators pick up on a bad actor, they tend not to just focus on the individual, but they start to look more thematically at the industry and say, where are the industry going wrong? And the best example of that is probably the banking sector in Australia. So the
Oh,
banks
interesting.
in Australia have been through
Oh.
some extraordinarily two or three very, very bad apples behaving really badly. For example, one bank was
Oh.
creating a set of fake accounts for dead people,
Oh,
and then
wow.
reporting numbers that were completely out of kilter with reality. And when that started to come to light, the whole industry was put under a spotlight, and certainly reputationally was seen as being, a very, very low character type of industry. So, financial services and banks, in my terms, are normally the gift that never stops giving in terms of new case studies.
Sure.
But that's normally where you see that type of bad behavior getting outsized regulatory interest.
Right. So interesting. Meg, I know you wanted to talk about outside actors.
Yes, something that I've seen lately, and that I know that you talk about as well, are bad actors online that can really act out and destroy an organization's reputation in an instant. So rather than just sitting around the campfire and you can trust that that guy will know that the buffalo are 4 days away that way, maybe you've got somebody in your ear going, actually, he doesn't actually know where the buffalo are. He's just lying to you. So those bad actors that are whispering in your company's ear, in the public's ear, can really cause a big problem. Why do these attacks even happen in the first place? What motivates some people to go beyond just leaving maybe a negative review to really act aggressively towards companies, maybe sometimes even in an organized way?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very big question, this, and it's becoming a huge problem for individuals who are trolled and also
Hmm.
for organizations who are the subject of these things. Um, so the motivations for bad actors are kind of fascinating, and it takes a long time to understand psychological motives and all of that. Often you find that the issue motivating them is not you as the target, it's them as
Hmm.
an unhappy individual in the first
Right.
place. The most common finding is that when you have online trolls, is that they're deeply problematic people. They've got massive issues themselves, and what they're doing is they are attaching their own problems and finding victims to make themselves feel better.
Right.
The new book that that is about to come out that I have written, it's called Forked Tongues, and this is a book which tries to dig into this phenomenon. And I've really been struck by the work of some psychologists in the early 2000s, really coming out of the University of British Columbia,
Hmm.
and they started to take a look at the assumption in psychology that bad people are just the opposite of good people. Okay,
Hmm.
so if you know about net personality scores and all of this type of work in psychology, it tends to be linear. You have
Sure.
people at +10, and then you have people who are -10. And where do you sit on this linear scale? And a couple of psychologists in the early 2000s challenged that, said actually they don't believe that bad actors are just the opposite of good actors. There's something really rather difficult and dangerous motivating bad
Hmm.
actors to do bad things. And they came up with a theory called the dark triad theory. And the dark triad theory identified three particular personality traits which are attached to really bad actors, including these online trolls that you're talking about. And those three traits are narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. And I
Hmm.
think it's super powerful, that analysis. And my book charts those particular three. I have quite a bit of fun with it in that what I do is I also attach that to Dante's descent into hell. So I put the
Oh.
narcissists right at the gates, and then I put the Machiavellians across the at the walls of Dis, and then I put the psychopaths right down at the very fiery depths. So I sort of chart the descent of humankind, or human unkind, as I put in the book, down
Uh-huh.
this ladder. And it's kind of interesting when you unpick it. Actually, funnily enough, again, it goes back. It's deeply in history, this too, as well, because and I went back. Let me read you this. I went back to, here we go, to to the Bible, weirdly, and from
Huh.
the letter of James. There's a fabulous quote from the letter of James, which says,
Yeah.
which goes like this. So it says, "So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How
Hmm.
great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species, but no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil full of deadly poison." So, this has such
Wow.
wonderful tendrils stretching right back through history. We've always been aware of the power of language to shape whole cultures, whole communities, and drive action and inaction. So yeah, so that question is a very complex one to address, the motivations of these very difficult people. Um, but it's quite helpful, I think. I found it very helpful to unpick this very big subject and to focus on those three of narcissists and Machiavellians and psychopaths. And what's then clear once you have that frame is that you could very quickly start to understand the motivations of each of those groups as to why they might be the type of troll that you detest. And so if you take, first of all, the narcissists tend to attack others to make themselves feel better.
Sure. Yep.
They're having a terrible time. They want others to feel bad or worse than they're feeling. So they
Mhm.
make others feel terrible as a mechanism to make themselves feel relatively better.
Right.
And that's a
Right.
classic narcissistic trait. You then go down a bit further to Machiavellians, and Machiavellians are those who will do people down not so much to make themselves feel better, but it's more because they happen to have a particular strategy or a particular dislike, and they are absolutely ruthless and relentless
Hmm.
in going after that particular strategy. So if I happen to have a dislike of you, Meg, and I decide that I want to take you down, I'm going to pursue that at every possible turn. And every time I see you post something, say something, I'm going to try and infect the dialogue around you. Those people
Ah,
are Machiavellian in this.
Hmm.
And this, of
yeah.
course, goes back to Niccolo Machiavelli. So that's them. So again, you can see a very different motivation to the motivation of the narcissist. And then you have the psychopaths,
Hmm.
who are a different breed again. They are um, absolutely unafraid to destroy themselves. They are utterly um, kind of open to the idea that they will blow up everything, themselves and someone
Mm.
else. So they have
Wow.
um, so they're remorseless, they're reckless. Often they're very egocentric. These psychopaths. There's a coldness to a psycho to the way the psychopath goes about their work. I've in writing the book, I've spent some time with some very, very troubled people, and
Hmm.
often you find that there's no remorse at all for what they've done. There's extreme coldness when you talk about any of the personal damage that they might have caused. There's a sort of blackness and a coldness to their eyes that is very difficult to pierce. And I think it's just
Mm.
because they genuinely don't have that kind of empathy or emotion.
Right.
They don't have that. It's just not a trait that they possess. And so this recklessness and coldness is what you see with psychopaths, which is why, of course, they're so difficult to deal with. So yeah, there's
Yeah.
a sort of smorgasbord of reasons, which a very long answer to your very simple question.
And I want to give a quick shout out. One of our clients, Abigail Marsh, she's a professor at Georgetown, and she studies psychopathy. As well, on the other side, she studies altruism and heroism, and yeah, it's
Courage.
so fascinating, and yeah, it's hard to get
Well,
into
she'll
the
be in.
mind.
I mean, it's such an interesting place to be
Yep.
as someone who's interested in structured research and thinking around these subjects, because it's very easy to be taken off into the sort of depth of the sort of oh my god land.
Right.
But actually, the chance to study in a disciplined way these type of people is it's both very important to do for our society, but trying to understand what motivates these people and how we can lead them out of it. But it's also, I think, very rewarding from a career perspective to do this.
Yeah. Interesting stuff.
One thing, Rupert, I'm so excited for when your book comes out. I'm going to be like one of the first people on the list to read it because I'm very interested in this area, and I think that you're really looking into the right areas to understand them and what drives them. But it sounds like from what you're saying that with that kind of deep historical precedent that people have always acted like this, there's almost no reason to believe that they'll stop. So if this is a problem that companies are going to have to face at some point over the course of their tenure, is there a way that they can prepare ahead of time or anything that they should not do when they're faced with an attack from these individuals?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that they can do. And the starting point, to my mind, is take care of yourself. You've got to remember these type of attacks are very stressful. They're very personal, and they can be very stressful on you as the leader of an organization, team leader, CEO, whatever level you are. These type of attacks on the company or on the organization and its practices are super stressful. And so lesson one is build resilience. You've got to understand that the organization has done nothing wrong, the organization has the right intent, and that when these type of attacks happen, you've got to be able to contextualize it quickly, protect the people who are in the front line of these attacks, remind them they've done nothing wrong, and then give them support. So the first lesson, number one, and I think the most important lesson, is organizational resilience to these things. I start when I talk with CEOs with the point that most of the time, these people have big problems. And what they're doing to you is actually nothing to do with you. It's a reflection of just how problematic they're finding their lives, their experiences, or what they're up to at the moment. And they're using you as some form of a sort of weaponized stick to try and either deflect what they're feeling about themselves or to just generally bring people along into their misery. And so organizational resilience is the first. But then there's some really good tactical stuff. So often this stuff happens quickly. So especially now online, where your digital exhaust is created all the time. And you can find that suddenly you're swamped with one particular attack that then has others then coming behind it. So organizing your narrative and doing so ahead of time so that you're ready and prepared for these type of attacks is, I think, a really, really good thing to do. And that's just simple techniques, tactics with your corporate affairs, communications directors and people. But often I think the other thing is to remember that you don't have to fight any battle. I mean, this is Sun Tzu and the Art of War, right? You don't need to actually take on the attacker in their chosen field of reference.
Right.
So if they've attacked you for something, sometimes the very best thing to do is to completely and utterly ignore him.
Yep.
Build your resilience. Don't worry about it, but recognize that, okay, a few people are going to comment on it. It'll come around. It'll blow up for a bit and then disappear. So that's one set of things. There are, however, some things which, and again, I come back to where we started this conversation, which is that if there is something you're being attacked for, look inside first, because you might well find that actually there are some things, behaviors, practices, which are not good and which are meriting that type of kind of character assassination. So where you find that, act super fast. And where you do find there as being cause for anything like that, my advice is apologize as quickly and as fully and as early as possible. You'll need to stand up against your lawyers, who typically will tell you not to do that for legal reasons, but increasingly law firms are starting to realize that actually that's a protection mechanism rather than some form of future liability. So there's a series of techniques that you need to think about. Look at yourself, actually identify whether there's a scintilla of veracity in what's being talked about. And if there is, work very fast to address that. Again, come back to capability. Character, if it's a capability issue, fix the operational problem. If it's a character flaw, fix the governance.
Yeah, I learned a long time ago that don't read the comments section. Because as you said, it's so many times it's got nothing to do with you, and when it comes to moving ahead, it can be really hard to do that when it feels like a personal attack from people who don't know you.
Right,
Right.
right. And actually intervening sometimes just makes it much
Yep.
worse. You're legitimizing
Hmm.
these illegitimate attacks by actually responding. And again, come back to the narcissist or the Machiavellian. They love that. That's
Right, right.
success. That's success number one. They've managed to get a reaction. And once you're in the reaction business, it's very hard to start dealing with that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do want to switch to AI. We have to talk about this as just one of the biggest topics on people's minds right now. With companies jumping on AI as quickly as they are, what do they need to think about from a reputation standpoint before they just jump in? Like, what common missteps are you seeing companies take when they deploy AI?
So again, I think it's very nice to come back to capability character here. AI has the potential to dramatically improve the efficiency of organizations, to dramatically innovate. AI has such phenomenal, outstanding, positive potential.
Hmm.
And I want to start with that because what I'm about to say will look like I'm a naysayer on AI, when actually
Right.
I'm extremely excited for the opportunity that AI has to do lots of really important innovation. For example, take the drug development sector. If
Hmm.
you think about the way in which the pharmaceutical firms and companies have had to build innovation, go through the approval processes, these things, often life-saving drugs, could take 2, 3 years to even come into the market. With AI at scale and at speed, you can fast track that process. And it's super exciting to think that maybe interventions to really help people with some extremely problematic health problems could be fast tracked through the use of AI. So lots of positives.
Yep.
However, the character side of AI is where I'm putting my lens at the moment. We
Hmm.
did a really interesting study where we looked at 110 different scandals which related to AI, and we published this in the California Management Review a year or two ago. And it was super interesting because the majority of these cases, we just analysed, the basis of which people felt this was a scandal. And it turns out that the majority of these are really to do with privacy, where
Yep.
they feel AI has overtaken or gone beyond what is a reasonable use or engagement with your data.
Right.
Hmm.
And that was over 50% of these kind of problems. So that's number one. Number two is bias. So when there's bias, when the AI has taken a decision and there's no way in which you can intervene or make a difference on that. And the third was the black box problem, the
Yep.
explicability problem, where you just simply don't know why it's come up with that. And so those three, if you think about those three deeply, what they actually are character problems of AI.
Hmm.
And it's the way in which AI is being structured ethically and morally within the organizations and the use. Now that's either poor governance, and I mean AI, I think, has suffered from extremely poor governance because we've rushed headlong to adopt AI for all the good reasons we've talked about, without pausing to ask our question: what should AI be allowed to do? And
Right.
where should AI just have the little bit of check and balance to make sure that it doesn't do stuff which we might regret in the future? And I think we're at that very important cusp point now where that question of governance of AI has got to be taken a lot more seriously, because we are deploying it at scale, at
Yep.
speed, across so many industries, and it's now
Hmm.
affecting billions of people every day. So that's the bit that I think is um, reputationally very risky. People will understand if a piece of AI gets something wrong, as long as it's just a straightforward piece of structuring that can be changed by an operational. But if the company has not put in ethical guidelines about use of data, discriminatory data,
Yep.
gender bias, pay problems. Um, Probably the most infamous case of bad technology and AI,
Hmm.
early AI, this was pattern recognition AI, was the case of Compass in the US, which is the AI system back in 2012, which was used by judges in 23 different states across America to help them with sentencing guidelines. And when
Hmm.
people came in front of them, they would ask this AI, how likely is this person to reoffend?
Right.
And this was discovered
Uh,
after 6 years of sentencing. It was discovered that the
wow.
AI regularly predicted that black defendants would go on to reoffend way more than they actually did, and that white defendants would go on to reoffend less than they actually did. So a huge 6 year miscarriage of justice, which was eventually uncovered by ProPublica. And that's just early stage AI. That was
Yep.
the pattern recognition AI that's
Hmm.
been around. By the way, people think of AI as being a modern phenomenon. Again, the first AI was used, I think, in 1956.
Right. Yep.
So
Ah.
lots of history of pattern recognition AI being used.
Yeah. It's so
Yeah,
interesting,
it's such a
especially because now a lot of businesses, it feels like they're rushing into it because they see their competitors, they just hear the term AI, we need to do it, and without fully understanding how and what that really means in the end.
It's very true. I'm chairing a panel at a big conference later this month in London, where we are looking at how these questions show up in the boardroom. So I have four very experienced board directors, and I'm going to put the questions to them about how do they consider questions relating to AI when they are not domain experts.
Right.
So a board needs to understand these things to be able to make the right questions. And I hope the answer that we'll get to will not come into the technicalities of what AI can or can't do for their operations in efficiency or innovation, because they're never going to know that
Right.
really. What I
hmm
do hope they will do is to understand that they have a not just a responsibility slash obligation, but the opportunity to protect the organizations that they are on the boards of through good governance of this and by asking the right questions about what should AI be allowed to do
Right.
and what ethical guidelines need to be put in place. For example, make sure personal data is anonymized. For example, check that there is a not a discriminatory aspect to the way it's been trained and the data set that it's been trained on, and so on and so forth.
Yep. I'm sorry, Meg, I interrupted you before.
Oh no, I was just going to mention about how it is a big problem, a big fear with these language models that they will just amplify the biases that we already enact within our culture and just show us almost like holding up a mirror to ourselves of what this is what you act like, and it just amplifies it even more. Something that I
Well,
really
I
think
think
is
that's
really
right,
very important.
and that's certainly what pattern recognition AI, what pre-generative AI has
Mm-hmm.
been accused, rightly actually, has been rightly accused of, because what it does is it takes historic patterns and it predicts futures based on historic patterns.
Right.
So bad in, bad out. And that was the problem, of course, with the Compass system, and it's been the problem with all sorts of predictive AI in that respect. Um, the move to generative is super interesting. And I've just
Yeah.
I published a paper which looks at or a provocation, not forget paper, a provocation which suggests that AI has moved beyond being a technology, and that AI is in fact, or it should be governed as a stakeholder.
Hmm.
And while my philosopher friends will argue furiously that it's that you can't have, that the AI can't be a moral agent because it's not sentient, and all of that good stuff, by the way, that doesn't mean to say that you can't, as an organization, start to think of AI in or at least generative AI as being a stakeholder, because generative AI creates content.
Right.
So in that
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
respect, why is it any different to a journalist? Now, to influence what a journalist writes, there are strategies in place. You provide briefings, you engage with them to shape what they're talking about. There's all sorts of backgrounds that you work on. The same actually could be done with AI. Now you can't actually speak to an AI. Well, you can speak to an AI, but what you can do is you can talk with the algorithm developers, you can work with the training data, so you can actually give limits about the training data that this AI is being trained on. There's a whole range of things that you can do, which in governance terms starts to put you much more in the driving seat as an organization rather than at the mercy of generative AI. It allows you to think about engagement with the parameters on which generative AI itself is built. And I think that's a really important question for boards to get to grips with today.
And I love that a provocation sounds so much more exciting than a paper.
It's definitely much more exciting than a paper.
So as I know you had a long day of teaching, so I don't want to keep you too long. Couple questions, love to get to at the end. It's the lightning round. These are questions I did not prep you on. Okay, so I just want your gut, your natural response. Do you have a favorite podcast?
This one.
Love that answer. Ooh, you're good. Do you have a second favorite podcast?
So I do my own podcast, but that's not my second favorite one. It's one that I find obviously super interesting and useful because I've got the chance to talk with whoever I want. It's called Global Conversations with Global Leaders. But I am a fan of podcasts that are surprising and different. So I tend not to sort of look at the usual ones like The Rest is Politics and all of these big ones. I tend to try and find ones that are either around culture or around surprising phenomena. I sort of surf, if you like, to try and find podcasts. So I don't have a favorite, but I tend to like episodes that are challenging and different. I am more interested in culture and cultural phenomena and how they relate to organizations than I am in probably anything else. And so I will actively seek out culture podcasts that seek to throw light on that question.
There's, I love Side Door, which is by the Smithsonian. And they go into the history of some of their collection to talk about why those items are important. And it is a lot of interesting cultural dives. And, you know, I'm the type of person who can spend hours in a museum like that. And it's great. I highly recommend it. It's called Side Door.
I will definitely look into that.
Great. So second question, in an alternate universe, what would you be doing for a living?
Architect.
Okay. Very cool.
I think I'd be an architect because there's something incredibly inspiring about the ability to turn an idea as to how we should live into something concrete, literally concrete.
Right.
So organizing spaces that allow people to behave the way they should behave, or to enable the culture to expand and fill a space. These are incredibly skilled things. By the way, I have no skills at all to be an architect, so this is pure fantasy land. But I love the idea of understanding that spaces create the conditions for humans to flourish, and that the chance to shape those would be a huge privilege.
Love that. Finally, imagine you're halfway to work. What is the one item that would make you turn around and go back if you forgot it?
My sense of equilibrium.
I love that. That's great. Okay. Have you forgotten that?
Regularly. It's important to check yourself because how you show up is really important. For it's respectful. And if I've got out of bed the wrong side and I'm on my way somewhere, I'll have to check myself and just make sure that I reset so that I can be who I need to be and show up in the right way. I think that's a responsibility we all have.
No disrespect to our other guests, but that might be the best answer this season so far. Love it.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
So Rupert, obviously our listeners and viewers can find you at sternstrategy.com. If they're interested in engaging you for keynotes and advisory sessions. Where else can we find you online?
Oxford, obviously. If you type my name in and put Oxford, you'll find all the different digital assets. Global Conversations with Global Leaders. If you find that podcast, you can hear some of the things that I've talked about, everything from the commercialization of space to bling and status in the Roman Empire. So that's a way of doing it. And I guess if you really, really, really are a good sleuth, you will also find me. I'm a musician, so you'll find some online stuff with some albums and a few YouTube things of me playing.
Cool. Okay, and
Great.
I'd love to have you back on when the book comes out.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Justin.
I can't wait.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Like I said, I know you're busy, and really appreciate you making time for us.
Great. Really enjoyed that.